The boardroom on the 47th floor of Aurora Dynamics glowed in shades of steel and glass. 10:30 at night. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows, each drop racing downward like the cascading thoughts in Danica Thornton's mind. She sat alone at the conference table, laptop open, fingers suspended above the keyboard. Her eyes, brown, intelligent, exhausted, reflected the glow of the screen. On it, a three-dimensional model of an intelligent infrastructure system, the kind that should power Seoul's smart city initiative, the kind that should keep thousands of people safe when it went live. But the model was drowning in red. Every fail-safe position glowed crimson. Pressure points where the system would collapse under load. Zones where a cascade failure would domino through the entire network. Danica had stared at that screen for 48 hours straight, cross-referencing data, running simulations, hoping, almost praying, that she was wrong, that the numbers were lying, that her fear of disaster was just immigrant paranoia, the hypervigilance of someone who didn't belong in this pristine corporate temple. She wasn't wrong. The fluorescent light of the screen cast shadows under her cheekbones. Her dark skin seemed to drink the blue light rather than reflect it. She wore the same charcoal blazer she'd worn yesterday. Her natural hair, braided in cornrows that took her 6 hours to do in her minimalist hotel room, had begun to unravel at the temples from pure stress. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had discovered something catastrophic and couldn't unsee it. The blank document waited. Danica opened it, placed her fingers on the keyboard. The report that would save lives or destroy her career stared back at her like a blank accusation. She began to type. Every keystroke was a choice. Every sentence was a bet against her own survival. Critical infrastructure vulnerabilities identified in Aurora Dynamics' intelligent city system. Analysis indicates systematic underestimation of load capacities, inadequate redundancy protocols, and failure mode scenarios that were documented but not addressed. Recommendation: immediate project suspension pending structural reassessment. Risk of cascade failure under peak demand, 73%. She typed it, all of it. No hedging, no corporate language to soften the blow. Just the truth that tasted like metal in her mouth. The office door opened without a knock. Seo Jun-ri stepped through like he owned the space, which, technically, he did. At 41, the CEO of Aurora Dynamics moved with the careful control of a man who had learned to make his body a weapon of precision. Tailored charcoal suit. No tie. He'd abandoned it somewhere between the evening board meeting and his midnight wanderings through his own company. His black hair, shot through with threads of silver at the temples, was mussed. His dark eyes, sharp as a knife's edge, took in the scene in exactly 1 second. A woman, alone, late night, laptop glowing with data he recognized as project critical. He should have left. Instead, he approached. "Ms. Thornton, you should be at your hotel." Danica didn't look up from the screen. "You should be at home." Seo Jun's lips curved, the smallest movement, barely a smile. "I asked first." But he didn't leave. He sat down in the chair across from her, a gesture that violated 17 unspoken rules of Korean corporate hierarchy. The CEO did not sit with contractors. The CEO did not make himself physically equal. She finally turned to him. Her eyes met his, and for just a moment, something shifted in both their faces. Recognition, perhaps, of another person willing to work past midnight because sleep was less necessary than answers. "What are you looking at?" he asked. Danica turned the laptop toward him. The red model spun slowly, like a dying star. His expression didn't change, but his hands tightened on the armrest of his chair. She saw the muscles in his jaw tense. "How long have you known?" "Since the second day. 3 weeks to be absolutely certain I wasn't seeing things. And the rest of the team? Don't know. Or they know and they're pretending they don't. Or..." She paused, choosing her words with the precision of someone who'd learned to speak carefully around power. "They've been told to pretend they don't." Seo Jun stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at Seoul, the neon arteries of the city, the rain turning the streets into mirrors. "If you send that report," he said without turning around, "you'll be labeled a troublemaker, possibly a saboteur. There will be people in this company who want to make sure your name is never hired again, not just in Korea, but in Asia. Maybe globally. I know. And you're going to send it anyway?" Now he turned to face her. "I'm going to send it because if I don't, when the system fails, and it will fail, there will be an investigation that asks why the woman who audited the project said nothing. And then I'll be more destroyed than I would be now." Danika's voice was steady. She'd rehearsed this conversation with herself over sleepless hours. "At least this way, I'm destroyed on principle." He crossed back to her, sat down in the chair beside her, not across from her. Close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and understated, like expensive wood. "You know that this will cost us both, don't you?" "Yes." "But you're going to do it anyway?" "Yes." He looked at her for what felt like an eternity, but was probably 5 seconds. Long enough for her to see the cracks in his mask, the weariness, the weight, the terrible loneliness of being the person at the top of an organization you suspect is rotten. Long enough for him to see her, not as a contractor, not as a problem to solve, not as a woman, but as someone who had chosen integrity over safety. "Then I'll stand with you," he said quietly. "When you send it, I'll stand with you." And that was the moment everything changed. What happens when the only person you can trust is the exact person you swore never to trust? If you've ever felt small in a space that was designed to make you feel small, if you've ever carried evidence of something wrong but feared the cost of speaking, stay with this story. Because this is about what happens when two people, each carrying their own battle scars, decide that silence is a luxury they can't afford. And if that resonates with you, please subscribe. We're building a library of stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and we need you to stay with us to see how this unfolds. Incheon International Airport emerged from the fog like a temple, all soaring architecture and minimalist perfection. Danica descended the stairs from the aircraft, her hand gripping the aluminum rail with the kind of intensity that suggested she was holding on to something more than just metal. Her carry-on bag was small, purposeful, packed with 3 weeks of clothing, and everything she needed to disappear into Seoul for a year. The past 8,000 miles had been calculated precisely. A contract from Aurora Dynamics, offered through a headhunter who'd found her name in a technical publication where she'd published an article on infrastructure resilience. The offer: systems engineer, 1-year assignment, Seoul-based, salary that was triple what she made in the States. The catch: no explanation for why they wanted her specifically. No details about the scope of the project. Just a PDF contract with 19 pages of non-disparagement clauses and confidentiality agreements that suggested someone had given serious legal thought to making sure she didn't talk. She'd called her mother before boarding in Chicago. "They're sending you to Korea?" Her mother's voice had carried that particular quality of concern that came from raising a black daughter in America. The knowledge that your child entering unfamiliar spaces meant entering spaces where her race made her visible in ways that could be dangerous. "For a year. It's a good contract, Mama." "Is it?" Her mother had paused. "Or are you running away?" The question had landed like a stone in still water. "I'm not running. I'm building." But they both knew it wasn't that simple. 5 years ago, there had been a situation at her previous firm. A senior engineer named Dr. Marcus Webb, who'd made mentoring feel like ownership, whose private meetings had subtle edges, whose comments about her body and potential seemed designed to blur the line between professional admiration and something else entirely. When she'd finally said no, explicitly, clearly, he'd made sure she understood that saying no meant marking herself as difficult, uncooperative, hostile to the collaborative spirit of the firm. She'd left quietly. A small severance, a reference that was technically positive, but somehow killed every opportunity she pursued for months. Her reputation somehow had preceded her in ways that felt orchestrated. So when the Aurora offer came, when a company on the other side of the world wanted her, wanted her specifically, based on her work and her competence. It felt like redemption and escape wrapped into one. Now, descending into the terminal, she understood that she'd been naive. A woman in a crisp navy suit held a sign with her name. "Ms. Thornton, welcome to Seoul. I'm Minji Park, Executive Secretary to our CEO. I'll be assisting with your transition to the office." Minji was 32, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything. Danika's designer luggage, her carefully selected professional wardrobe, the way she moved through the airport like someone who was used to being visible and uncomfortable with it. There was something knowing in her gaze, as if she recognized something in Danica immediately. The drive to Aurora Dynamics took 40 minutes through Seoul's layered architecture. Old temples visible between modern office buildings, the Buddhist-Christian tension of Korean urbanism displayed in neon and stone. Rain began as they merged onto the expressway, soft at first, then insistent, transforming the city into something impressionistic and uncertain. "Your first time in Korea?" Minji asked from the front seat of the black Genesis, perfect professional English with a Seoul accent underneath. "First time in Asia," Danica replied. "Then you'll need to understand some things quickly." Minji's tone wasn't unfriendly, but it carried the weight of someone delivering important intelligence. "Mr. Ri is an unusual CEO. He's not traditional Korean corporate culture, but he's also not Western in the way you might expect. He moves between worlds. It makes him powerful and very, very dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "He doesn't forgive mistakes, but he also doesn't forget loyalty. The employees who serve him well, he protects them absolutely. The ones who betray him..." Minji trailed off, but the implication was clear. Just be careful about where you place your trust. The Aurora Dynamics building rose from the Seoul landscape like a monument to corporate ambition. 47 stories of glass and steel, so reflective that it seemed to absorb the city rather than simply occupying space within it. Danica had seen the building in the technical specifications attached to her contract. It looked different in person, more imposing, more like a fortress designed to keep people out rather than a workspace designed to invite people in. Minji led her through the executive floor. The office was a study in controlled minimalism, open spaces designed to give the illusion of transparency while maintaining perfect hierarchies of access. Private executive suites lined the perimeter, their glass walls rendered opaque by expensive frosting. And at the center, visible through multiple layers of geometric partitions, was Seo Jun Ri's office. He was waiting for her. The morning light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the CEO's office was merciless. It revealed every flaw, every imperfection, or it would have, if Seo Jun Ri seemed like the kind of man who had any. He stood with his back to the window, the city spread behind him like conquered territory. He wore a black turtleneck and tailored trousers that suggested he'd arrived before sunrise, had already consumed several meetings, and would probably work until midnight. "Ms. Thornton, thank you for accepting our offer." He didn't extend his hand. In Korean corporate culture, handshakes were sometimes too Western, too informal. Instead, he inclined his head slightly, the kind of gesture that cost nothing and meant everything. Danica had prepared for this meeting. She'd researched him obsessively. Rie Seo-jun, born to a chaebol family that had diversified from heavy manufacturing into clean energy and smart cities. Educated at Seoul National University and MIT. Returned to Korea at 32, with a reputation as someone who understood technology and understood people, and most importantly, understood how to navigate power structures that preferred tradition to innovation. "Thank you for the opportunity," she replied formally. "You understand the scope of the assignment? The contract mentions the Intelligent Infrastructure Project for Seoul's District 18 Smart City Initiative. I'm here to audit and optimize system performance." "Correct." He moved to his desk, a minimal slab of dark wood with almost nothing on it, just a laptop and a pen. Everything else was filed away in the geometric storage units that lined the walls. The project is scheduled to go live in 9 months. It's worth approximately $1.2 billion in direct infrastructure costs, approximately 4 times that in broader economic impact if it succeeds. approximately 4 times that in losses and reputation damage if it fails. Danica noted the math. He was giving her the full weight of the responsibility immediately. It was a technique. Establish magnitude early, so she understood the stakes before she had time to develop casual assumptions. "I've reviewed the preliminary technical specs," she said. "The architecture is sound, but there are some redundancy questions I'd like to explore." "Good. That's why you're here." He paused. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her wonder what he saw. A Black American woman in Seoul, speaking English with the confidence of someone who'd spent her life in technical spaces, which meant she'd spent her life defending her competence. "I'll be direct with you, Miss Thornton. This project is politically sensitive. There are people in this company, and outside it, who would prefer that it fail. Why would anyone prefer a multi-billion-dollar project to fail? Because failure creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates opportunities for different parties to consolidate power. Success, on the other hand, means that certain established systems stay in place." He sat down at his desk, a gesture that meant she was supposed to sit as well. "If this project succeeds, it will make certain people, namely, our executive director Kwon Tae-oh and his network, less relevant. So there are incentives to ensure that doesn't happen." Danica understood corporate politics. She'd lived in them for 15 years. But there was something different about this conversation. The CEO was literally telling her that sabotage was possible, that it might already be happening, and that he was bringing her in possibly to document it, or possibly to be the scapegoat when it continued anyway. "If it succeeds, you'll be credited as the engineer who saved a critical project," he continued. "If it fails, you'll be blamed as the auditor who missed critical flaws. Do you understand those terms?" "Yes." "And you're willing to accept them?" Danica thought of the phone call with her mother, of the years of fighting for credibility in spaces that treated her like she didn't belong, of the recommendation letter that had somehow killed her career despite being technically positive. "Yes," she said. "I'm willing to accept them." Seo-jun nodded slowly. "Then let me make one thing clear. I hired you because your work speaks for itself. I investigated you thoroughly. I know your technical qualifications are beyond question. I also know that you were forced out of your previous position through institutional mechanisms that left no paper trail, but left you without credibility in your home market. I know because those mechanisms are not unique to your country. They exist everywhere power structures feel threatened by competence." He paused. "What I don't know is whether you can survive in an environment where competence is not sufficient. In an environment where you'll be visible in ways that make you either invaluable or expendable, with very little middle ground." The statement hung in the air between them, true and dangerous in equal measure. "I can survive," Danica said quietly. "I've been surviving my whole life." "Good. Because that's what this requires. Survival." He stood, a gesture that meant the meeting was ending. "Your office is on the 43rd floor. Your team lead is Ji-hoon Lim. He's excellent technically and trustworthy personally. Minji will help you navigate cultural expectations. Beyond that, trust your instincts. They've gotten you this far." Danica stood as well. As she turned toward the door, he spoke again. "One more thing, Ms. Thornton. If you discover something significant about this project, something concerning, something that makes you question its integrity, I need to know immediately. Alone. Before you tell anyone else. Can you do that?" She looked back at him. His expression was carefully neutral, but there was an intensity in his eyes that suggested the question mattered more than the contract, more than the salary, more than anything else. "Yes," she said. "If I find something, I'll tell you first." "Good." She left his office feeling like she'd made a deal with something larger than herself. 3 days into her assignment, Danica had found the first anomaly. It was small, a scheduling adjustment in the load-balancing protocols that shouldn't have been there. The system was designed to distribute power across the network in waves, preventing any single point from becoming overwhelmed. But someone had manually adjusted the parameters so that the distribution was slightly uneven, creating a theoretical pressure point in Zone 7 that would trigger a cascade failure if the system hit 87% capacity during peak demand hours. Alone in her assigned office, a glass-walled space on the 43rd floor that was visible to everyone passing by, which meant she was being watched, even when no one was looking. Danica ran the simulation again. And again. Each time, the system collapsed at exactly the same threshold. The failure wasn't random or accidental. It was programmed. She documented everything in a secure file, encrypted with 3 layers of security. Then she did what she'd been trained to do. She went to her team lead. Ji-hoon Lim was exactly as Seo-jun had promised. Technically excellent, and more importantly, kind. He was 40 years old, with the kind of face that came from spending decades in front of computer screens. Pale, thoughtful, with lines around his eyes from concentrated focus. When she showed him the anomaly, his face went white. "This shouldn't be here," he said quietly, running the simulation himself, as if he didn't believe her initial findings. "This is deliberate. I know. We need to report this immediately." "To who?" Danica asked. He thought about it. The calculation was visible on his face. Who could be trusted? Who might be involved? Who might seem trustworthy, but was actually part of whatever network had programmed this particular gateway to disaster? "To Mr. Rhee," he finally said. "No one else." "What about the project manager, your direct supervisor?" "No." Ji-hoon's response was immediate and certain. "I don't trust him. I think he's connected to the people who might want this to fail." So Danica documented the finding, prepared the analysis, and requested a private meeting with Seo-jun. The system for scheduling this was formal enough that it couldn't be refused, but discreet enough that no one would necessarily know why the CEO had called an engineer to his office. But before the meeting could happen, everything changed. There was a meeting with the entire technical team. Engineering leads, project managers, contractors, systems architects. The kind of meeting that was designed to appear collaborative, but was actually a hierarchical structure disguised as conversation. Danica was invited not as a full participant, but as a specialist contributor, which meant she could speak if spoken to, but wasn't expected to initiate conversation. The project manager, a man named Suk-jin, who had the comfortable arrogance of someone who'd been promoted primarily through seniority rather than competence, presented updated performance metrics. According to his slides, the system was tracking perfectly. All redundancies were secure, all fail-safes were functional, and the project was ready for Phase 3 implementation ahead of schedule. Danica listened to the presentation and felt something cold move through her chest. The numbers were wrong. Not slightly wrong. Completely wrong. Before she could stop herself, she raised her hand. The room went quiet. In Korean corporate culture, interrupting a presentation was like standing up and announcing that you believed your ideas mattered more than hierarchy, which, technically, she was. "Yes, Ms. Thornton?" Suk-jin's voice had changed. The condescension was suddenly sharper. "I have a question about the load balancing data from 3 days ago. The parameters seem inconsistent with current standards." "The parameters were adjusted for optimal efficiency," Suk-jin replied smoothly. "This is standard optimization procedure. The adjustments create a cascade failure point at 87% capacity," Danica said. She kept her voice professional, neutral, the voice of someone simply presenting data. "I've run the simulation 6 times. The result is consistent. If the system reaches peak demand during summer months, it will collapse." The room went completely silent. "Ms. Thornton, I understand that you're new to our company and perhaps unfamiliar with our operating procedures," Suk-jin began, his tone shifting toward something that was almost paternal. "But I can assure you that these parameters are intentional and part of our documented safety protocols. I don't have access to documentation that explains the cascade vulnerability," Danica said. "That's because the documentation exists at a level above your access clearance," Suk-jin replied. The other managers nodded. A collective gesture that suggested she was now officially a problem. An outsider who didn't understand hierarchy. A woman who didn't know her place in the room. But before he could continue his delegitimization of her, another voice spoke up. Actually, I'd like to see those simulations. Minji appeared in the doorway, though she shouldn't have been in the room. She was an executive secretary, support staff, not technical personnel. But she was holding a tablet, and there was an authority in her presence that suggested she had more access and more power than her title indicated. If Ms. Thornton has identified a vulnerability, we should assess it. Sukjin's face tightened. This is a technical team meeting. With respect, Minji, administrative personnel. Administrative personnel who report directly to Mr. Ri, Minji interrupted smoothly. And who he's asked to monitor project integrity. So I think the simulations would be valuable. It was a perfectly executed power play. She'd invoked the CEO without claiming to speak for him, implied that she was authorized to be involved, and suggested that Sukjin's refusal would be a personal slight to leadership. He had no move that didn't involve backing down. I'll have the documentation sent to your tablet, he said finally, his voice now carefully neutral. After the meeting, Danica found Minji waiting for her in the hallway outside the conference room. Thank you, Danica said, for defending me in there. I wasn't defending you, Minji replied. Her eyes scanned the hallway to ensure they were alone. I was protecting the project. What you found? The cascade vulnerability. It's real, isn't it? You didn't misread the data. No, I didn't misread it. Minji stepped closer, lowering her voice. Then you need to be careful who you trust about this. The people who programmed that vulnerability did it deliberately, which means they're either trying to destroy the project or destroy you, and we need to figure out which before you end up in a position where you can't protect yourself. Do you know who did it? No, but I know someone who might. Minji smiled slightly. And I know that sharing an umbrella makes you an ally in Korean culture. It means you've invited someone into your personal space, which means you're trusting them with something real. So let's get lunch. And then I'll tell you what I've learned about the architecture of this corruption. The rain had started again by the time they left the building. The confidant. The rain was heavier that night. The kind of rain that seemed personal, designed specifically to make Seoul feel more isolated, more like a city encased in glass with only the people inside each building real and alive. Danica spent the afternoon and evening running additional simulations, documenting everything in multiple encrypted formats. She was terrified of what she'd found, and more terrified of what would happen if she stayed silent about it. Minji had told her that Sukjin was connected to someone named Kwon Tae-oh, an executive director who'd been with the company since its founding, and who had significant influence over the board. Minji had also told her that Kwon had much to gain if the Smart City project failed. Specifically, it would discredit a certain faction of the board, including Seo-jun, and consolidate power among the older guard, the people who preferred traditional industrial investments, to the risky uncertainty of clean energy and technological innovation. It all made a terrible kind of sense. Around 11 o'clock, Danica received a message on her encrypted work phone. My office. Now. SR. The building was almost empty at this hour. Just the cleaning staff and the obsessive overachievers who treated midnight like a normal working time. Danica rode the elevator to the 47th floor and found Seo-jun waiting in his office with 2 cups of coffee sitting on the small table by his window. Sit, he said. There was no please. There didn't need to be. He was already operating outside the normal protocols of corporate interaction. CEOs didn't offer coffee to contractors, didn't invite them to private meetings at midnight, didn't sit beside them as intellectual equals. She sat. He handed her the coffee. It was exactly the temperature for drinking, which suggested he'd prepared it specifically, had waited, had anticipated her arrival. Tell me what you found, he said. So she did. She told him about the cascade vulnerability, the deliberate parameter adjustment, the simulation failures, the presentation where Sukjin had tried to gaslight her into believing the data was wrong. She told him about Minji's intervention, and Minji's suggestion that Kwon Tae-oh had something to do with the corruption. Seo-jun listened without interrupting. He drank his coffee and looked out at Seoul, the city reduced to neon, and reflected light by the rain and the darkness. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "I had suspicions," he said finally, "about the project and about the people who want it to fail. But suspicion is different from data. Suspicion doesn't survive in a corporate environment where documentation is everything. Thank you for giving me data. What are you going to do with it?" He turned to face her. "I don't know yet. If I move too quickly or in the wrong direction, I lose. If I move too slowly, the project fails and people get hurt. So I need to be strategic. People could die if this fails," Danica said. The words came out more intensely than she'd intended. The intelligent infrastructure system is designed to manage power distribution for an entire district. If it cascades during peak demand, it's not just an engineering failure. It's a human disaster. "I know." There was something in his expression that suggested he did know, deeply and completely. "Which is why you're here. Which is why I hired you. I needed someone who would prioritize safety over politics. Someone who wouldn't be compromised by the internal power structures. Someone who would tell me the truth, even if the truth was dangerous." He stood up and walked to the window. The rain was so heavy now that it seemed like the city was dissolving behind the glass. "The problem," he continued, "is that if I expose this based on your data, Kwon will immediately attack your credibility. He'll suggest that you misunderstood the system, that you're unfamiliar with Korean engineering standards, that you're an outside agitator trying to justify your enormous salary by creating problems that don't actually exist. So I'm the scapegoat. Possibly. Unless I make myself your partner in this, which makes it a corporate governance question rather than a technical one. Which means I'm inviting Kwon and whoever backs him to move against both of us." Danica understood what he was saying. He was telling her that standing with her would cost him politically, would put him in direct conflict with powerful forces inside his own company, might even threaten his position as CEO. He was also telling her that he was considering it anyway. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "Why would you risk your position for a contractor you've known for 3 days?" Seo-jun turned back to her. He was silhouetted against the rain-obscured city, and in the darkness of his office lit only by the ambient light of Seoul, he looked less like a CEO and more like a person. Someone carrying his own weight, his own doubts, his own war. "Because I've spent my entire life learning to be ruthless," he said quietly. "Because I was raised to believe that sentiment is weakness and strategy is everything. Because I've been taught that the cost of power is abandoning your humanity." He paused. "But the truth is, I'm tired of being ruthless. I'm tired of being strategic. I'm tired of abandoning my humanity, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life explaining my compromises to myself." "That's not an answer to my question," Danica said. "No, it's not." He sat back down, closer to her than before. "My answer is that you remind me of someone I used to be. Someone who believed that competence should be enough, that integrity should matter. That person died somewhere along the way. I buried them in the pursuit of power. But maybe, if I help you protect that version of yourself, if I stand with you when standing with you is difficult, maybe that person doesn't have to stay dead." It was the most honest thing she'd heard from him, and it terrified her. "If we do this," she said, "if we expose this together, we both lose everything, or we both win everything. There's no middle ground." "I know." "And you're willing to bet your company on that?" "I'm willing to bet my soul on that," Seo-jun corrected. "My company, that's just collateral." Outside, the rain continued its assault on the city. The two of them, a Black American engineer and a Korean CEO, unlikely allies in an unlikely war, sat in the darkness and made a decision that would reshape everything that came after. It took 3 days for the counterattack to begin, which meant either Suk-jin had informed Kwon immediately, or Kwon had anticipated a possible move from Seo-jun and was prepared with contingencies. The mechanism was brilliant in its subtlety. A memo was circulated through the technical division announcing that the load balancing parameters had been reviewed by a specialized consulting firm and had been found to be within optimal range. The memo was signed by Seok-jin and countersigned by an external engineer whose credentials were impressive, whose analysis was thorough, and whose conclusion was absolutely wrong. The external engineer had essentially rubber-stamped the cascade vulnerability as if it were a feature rather than a flaw. Danica received the memo at 7 in the morning. By 8, she had cross-referenced the consulting firm with the external engineer and discovered that the company was a subsidiary of a larger holding company that had board connections to Aurora Dynamics. The external engineer had, in fact, been retained by Kwon Taeho's office directly. The analysis was not independent. It was corporate performance art designed to make the corruption look like competence. She sent the findings to Seo-jun. "They're moving faster than we planned. They're trying to bury this before we can surface it." His response came within minutes. "I know. They're also moving against your credibility directly. Expect challenges to your authority in the next technical meetings. Stay professional. Document everything." The challenge came that afternoon in a team meeting with 40 people. Large enough to be public, small enough to maintain organizational consistency. Seok-jin presented the new independent analysis and suggested that the previous concerns had been based on a misunderstanding of current engineering standards. The external engineer was connected via video conference and was happy to answer any technical questions. Danica had prepared for this. She had her laptop loaded with parallel analysis, documentation of the cascade failure vulnerability, simulation data that proved the system was unsafe. She raised her hand. "I have a question about the methodology used in the external analysis," she began carefully, aware that she was about to challenge not just Seok-jin, but also an external authority who had more seniority than her by default. "Of course," Seok-jin said, his tone dripping with false patience. "The analysis assumes that the parameters were set correctly, which means it validates the system rather than auditing it. My concern is that this approach doesn't identify the original source of the parameters or explain the logic behind why a cascade failure point would be deliberately programmed into a safety system." The external engineer, whose name was Park Do-hyun and who had an impressive record of consulting for major Korean corporations, smiled condescendingly. "Ms. Thornton, I understand you're relatively new to this project and perhaps to Korean industrial standards more broadly, but I can assure you that the parameters are consistent with industry best practices. What you're identifying as a cascade failure point is actually part of a sophisticated load-shedding protocol designed to protect the broader system by sacrificing lower priority zones during extreme demand events. It was technically accurate, which made it the perfect lie. Yes, there were scenarios where you deliberately sacrificed lower priority zones. But this wasn't a scenario. This was deliberate sabotage disguised as strategy." "With respect," Danica replied, "load-shedding protocols should be triggered by democratic consensus across the board of directors, not by a parameter embedded in the system code. The fact that this parameter exists and wasn't disclosed in the project specification suggests—" "Ms. Thornton," Seok-jin interrupted, his voice now taking on a tone of benevolent condescension. "I think what we're seeing here is the difference between American and Korean engineering approaches. In Korea, we often embed strategic flexibility into our systems, knowing that on-the-ground conditions might require adjustments that need to happen automatically rather than through committee consensus. Your concern comes from a perhaps overly bureaucratic perspective." It was a masterful pivot. He'd taken her technical objection and reframed it as cultural misunderstanding, as if her hesitation wasn't based on legitimate engineering concerns, but on her foreignness, her outsider status, her inability to understand how things work in Seoul. The room shifted visibly. She could feel the collective decision being made. Danica was overcomplicating things, was perhaps culturally incompatible with the work environment, was creating unnecessary friction. The external engineer nodded as if her objections had been satisfactorily addressed. Several of the Korean engineers avoided her eyes, which meant they were uncomfortable, but wouldn't voice that discomfort in front of authority. By the time the meeting ended, Danika's professional credibility had been significantly damaged through the simple mechanism of making her concerns sound like incompetence rather than intelligence. She found Minji waiting for her in the hallway outside the conference room. Minji's face was controlled, but her eyes were sharp with anger. "That was deliberate humiliation," Minji said quietly. "Designed to make you seem unreliable before they go further with their attack." "I know," Danika replied, "which means Seo-jun needs to move faster. If they succeed in establishing that I'm not credible, then anything I uncover after this becomes suspect as well." "Come with me," Minji said. "We need to talk to Mr. Ri." But they didn't get the chance. Before they could even reach the executive floor, Danika's phone rang. It was her hotel concierge, and they were calling to inform her that someone had tampered with her room and that the hotel was recommending she change hotels immediately for security reasons. Nothing had been stolen, but someone had been there. Someone had searched her belongings, had examined her documents, had sent a very clear message. "We know where you sleep. We have access to your private space. We're not just attacking you professionally. We're letting you know we could destroy you personally if we wanted to." Danika felt something cold move through her. This wasn't corporate politics anymore. This was intimidation. And it was just the beginning. The apartment that Minji arranged for Danika was small but secure, located in a building with professional-grade security, in a neighborhood that was both modern and obscure enough that it wouldn't be obvious to someone searching for her. It was also equipped with a private kitchen, which meant Minji could cook for her, which was apparently Minji's way of processing information and demonstrating loyalty simultaneously. They sat at the small table that night, with Minji's carefully prepared bibimbap in front of them, and Minji explained the corporate architecture of corruption. "Kwon Tae-oh is the architect of everything," Minji said, her English precise and careful. "He's been with the company since Mr. Ri's father founded it in 1987. He was the one who helped transition Aurora from pure heavy industry into energy diversification. But what people don't know is that in the process, he built a network. Not just business connections, but personal loyalty obligations, favors, debts, family relations. In Korean business, these networks are everything. Money is less important than obligation. So if Seo-jun tries to expose him, Kwon has leverage over too many people." Exactly. Which is why Mr. Ri has been careful. He can't just eliminate Kwon. He has to find a way to dismantle the entire network, but that requires proof of systematic corruption that's so overwhelming that no one can deny it. One project failure won't do it, but a multi-billion-dollar fraud that was meant to tank a crucial project and was prevented by due diligence, that might do it. "I'm the due diligence," Danika realized. "You're the evidence," Minji corrected. "You're also the witness, which is why they're trying to discredit you now. If they can establish that you're an incompetent foreign contractor who misunderstood basic engineering protocols, then anything you uncover after this becomes suspect. So what's the strategy? How do we survive this and expose them at the same time?" Minji was quiet for a moment. She looked at Danika with an intensity that suggested she was making a decision about trust. "There is someone I know. Someone with access to information that exists outside the official channels. Someone who can verify what you're discovering." "Who?" "Ji-hoon Lim." Danika felt something shift. Ji-hoon was the technical lead who'd seemed kind, who'd worked with her collaboratively on the project. But she'd also been warned by Seo-jun to trust carefully, to understand that corporate environments were full of people performing loyalty while actually serving other interests. Can he be trusted? Yes. But he has to be approached correctly. You have to give him a reason to trust you back. Minji stood and walked to her small kitchen window, which looked out onto Seoul's night landscape. 3 years ago, Ji-hoon's department identified serious problems with a previous Aurora project. Safety problems, the kind that would have required major investment to fix. He went to his supervisor about it. His supervisor made the problems disappear from the official record. What happened? Nothing. Because there was no official problem, Ji-hoon was left with knowledge that something was deeply wrong, and no one to report it to without looking like he was creating problems where none officially existed. It broke something in him. He's a quiet man, a loyal employee, but he carries the knowledge that he participated in a cover-up by staying silent. He's been waiting for redemption without knowing when it would come. So if I present him with evidence that he can act on, he'll act, Minji finished, because he won't be able to live with himself if he doesn't. That's a calculated assumption about his character. That's an understanding of his humanity, Minji said gently. In Korean culture, we learn that loyalty to your organization is paramount, but we also learn that there are limits to that loyalty. There are principles that matter more than hierarchy, and when those are violated, it creates a wound that never fully heals. Ji-hoon has that wound. You can help him heal it by giving him permission to be righteous. The next morning, Danica requested a private meeting with Ji-hoon. He agreed without asking questions, which was either a sign of trustworthiness or a sign that he was already aligned against her. There was no way to know until she spoke. She met him in a coffee shop far from the Aurora building, a small cafe in a residential neighborhood where they were unlikely to be recognized or observed. Ji-hoon arrived exactly on time, ordered an Americano, and waited for her to speak. "I need your help," Danica said directly. "And I need to know if you're willing to provide it despite the personal consequences." Ji-hoon's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "What kind of help?" "Help verifying what I'm discovering about the Intelligent Infrastructure Project. Help confirming that there are deliberate sabotage mechanisms embedded in the system. And help testifying about what you found, if it comes to that." Ji-hoon was quiet. He looked at his coffee. He looked out the window at Seoul's daylight face, so different from the neon landscape she'd seen at night. "I've been waiting years for someone to ask me to do this," he said finally. "I didn't know I was waiting, but I was, so yes, I'll help." Over the next 2 weeks, Ji-hoon provided Danica with access to the complete technical history of the project. Every version of the system code, every parameter adjustment, every modification that had been made since the project's inception. Using that access, Danica was able to document exactly when the Cascade vulnerability had been introduced, who had access to the system at that time, and which manager had authorized the changes. It was Suk-jin, with approval from Kwon Tae-oh. The evidence was solid. Absolutely solid. Unmovable. The kind of evidence that would survive any challenge because it was documented in the system itself, time-stamped, traceable. SEO June received the final report late one night. The same night that rain had returned to Seoul. The kind of rain that seemed to fall from a different emotional altitude than the previous rains. This rain felt like cleansing, like inevitability. He read the entire document in his office, with Danica and Minji present. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for such a long time that Danica began to wonder if he was going to act on it at all. "This is enough to destroy Kwon," he said finally. "It's enough to dismantle his network, enough to send people to prison, enough to restructure the company. But it requires me to destroy myself in the process, because I knew these suspicions existed. I brought you here because I suspected this was happening, which means I'll be complicit if I don't act, and I'll be a class traitor if I do act. You'll survive," Minji said quietly. "Because the alternative is you live forever knowing you participated in something evil through your silence." "That's exactly what Kwon would say," Seo-jun replied, but there was a ghost of a smile on his face. "That sound of moral argument is the exact sound of my father in my ear, telling me that survival is the only virtue that matters." "Then maybe," Danica said, "you need to choose something other than survival. Maybe you need to choose something that matters more than comfort." Seo-jun looked at her. His expression was unreadable. "You understand what that means for us, don't you? For this alliance we're building? It means that whatever happens next, we face together," Danica replied. "And the world will probably interpret it as something it's not. There will be people who think I advanced because of personal connection with you, rather than professional excellence. There will be people who think you protected me for reasons that have nothing to do with justice. We'll both be reduced to a narrative that erases what we're actually doing. Will that be acceptable to you? Danica thought about the years she'd spent fighting for credibility, the ways her competence had been questioned and reframed through the lens of other people's assumptions. She thought about her previous workplace, about the mentor who'd made mentorship feel like ownership. She thought about the choice she'd made when she decided to come to Korea, to step into a space where she didn't know the rules, where she couldn't rely on her previous understanding of hierarchy, where competence alone had to be enough. "Nothing about this situation is acceptable," she said, "but we're choosing it anyway. So yes, I'm willing to face the consequences." Outside, the rain fell harder. And inside the CEO's office on the 47th floor of Aurora Dynamics, 3 people made a decision that would reshape everything that came after. Danica didn't sleep for the next 72 hours. Instead, she worked with Ji-hoon and Minji to construct what they called the evidence architecture, a layered presentation of data that would move from technical specifics to strategic implications to criminal liability in a way that would be impossible to dismiss or reframe. The technical layer showed the cascade vulnerability and the deliberate parameter adjustment that created it. The strategic layer showed the timeline of the adjustments and connected them to board meetings where Kwon had advocated for certain decisions that would benefit the Smart City project's failure. The criminal layer showed the offshore accounts where the projected savings from the project's failure had been routed, millions of dollars that were supposed to fund the Smart City initiative, but instead existed in bank accounts in Singapore and the Cayman Islands. It was beautiful evidence. Terrible and beautiful. The kind of evidence that once released into the world couldn't be contained or negotiated with. It would either destroy Kwon, or it would destroy the person who released it. The plan was for Seo-jun to present this evidence to the board of directors in a closed session, which would give him control of the narrative and the mechanism of exposure. He would position himself as the CEO who'd discovered internal corruption and was taking responsibility for ensuring it was addressed. It was a risky move. It could position him as either a reformer or as someone who'd allowed corruption to flourish on his watch, but it was strategically sound. But Kwon didn't wait for the board meeting. Instead, he moved first. The story broke in the media, a carefully planted leak to a major business newspaper suggesting that Aurora Dynamics had hired an American engineering contractor as a diversity hire, that she had discovered serious technical problems that didn't actually exist, and that she was now using false technical claims to damage the credibility of Korean management. The article included comments from unnamed sources suggesting that she was possibly being manipulated by CEO Seo-jun in a personal relationship that was clouding his professional judgment. It was a preemptive strike designed to poison the narrative before the truth could be released. Danica read the article in her apartment and felt something very close to despair. They had the evidence. They had the documentation. They had the proof of deliberate sabotage and corporate fraud. But they were going to lose because the story had already been written in a way that made their evidence look like a cover-up for personal agenda. She called Seo-jun. "They've moved the game board. The evidence doesn't matter anymore if people believe the narrative before they see the data." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm calling an extraordinary press conference for tomorrow morning. I'm going public with everything." "That's not the plan. That doesn't give you time to prepare the board." "Plans change," Seo-jun replied. "Sometimes you have to act faster than you anticipated because your opponent moves faster. Sometimes you have to release your evidence before you're ready because the alternative is complete narrative loss." "If you do this," Danica said, "if you go public instead of going to the board, you lose the protection of internal processes. You're exposing yourself to direct legal challenge from Kwon and everyone connected to him." "I know," he said. "But I'm also ensuring that the truth exists in the public domain before it can be controlled. Truth is harder to kill when it's public. It's only vulnerable in the spaces between knowing and revealing." He hung up before she could argue further. The press conference was scheduled for Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Danica didn't sleep that night either. She sat in her apartment and watched Seoul's nightscape, the neon and glass and electric light of a city that had no idea that one of its major corporations was about to undergo seismic transformation. At 6 in the morning, she received a message from Minji. "Whatever happens today, You did the right thing. For what it's worth, I know that. At 8, she received a message from Ji-hoon. Whatever happens today, the truth matters. Thank you for helping me remember that. At 9:30, she received a message from Seo-jun. I need you to be at the press conference. I need the world to see you standing beside me when I say this. Are you willing? She was, even though it violated every instinct for self-preservation, even though it would confirm the narrative of personal relationship that had already been planted in the media, even though it would invite scrutiny of her motivations, her credibility, her integrity. She was willing, because sometimes choosing what was right meant being willing to be misunderstood. The press conference was held in Aurora Dynamics' main auditorium, a space designed for exactly this kind of dramatic revelation. Glass and steel and carefully positioned lighting that would photograph well. The media arrived within minutes of the announcement, journalists and photographers and video crews crowding into the space like a school of predatory fish that had sensed blood in the water. Seo-jun sat at a table with both his COO and his head of internal audit, positioned in a way that suggested corporate oversight and process. Behind them, the company logo was displayed on a screen. Everything was designed to communicate legitimacy and institutional confidence. Danica was asked to sit slightly to the side, not quite at the table, but more visible than a simple audience member. It was a positioning that said she was involved, but not entirely central. It was also a positioning that made every person in the room see her and remember her face. Seo-jun began without preamble. Thank you for your time. This morning, I'm announcing that Aurora Dynamics has discovered evidence of systematic fraud involving multiple members of our senior leadership and board of directors. The fraud specifically involves the Intelligent Infrastructure Project for Seoul's District 18 Smart City Initiative, a project that is critical infrastructure designed to serve hundreds of thousands of residents of this city. The room erupted in questions, but Seo-jun continued without acknowledging them. The fraud involves the deliberate introduction of systemic vulnerabilities into the project's technical architecture, designed to ensure that when the system went live, it would fail catastrophically. This failure would have resulted in both loss of life and hundreds of millions of dollars in economic damage. The motivation for this sabotage was the protection of existing financial networks that would have been displaced by the Smart City project's success. He paused, took a breath. This was the moment where he would either be a reformer or a complicit leader. Everything depended on the next words. This fraud was discovered by Ms. Danica Thornton, our systems engineer contractor, who was brought on to audit the project specifically because her external perspective would allow her to see problems that internal personnel might have normalized or overlooked. When she discovered the sabotage, she reported it through proper channels. Instead of receiving protection, she was subject to professional delegitimization and personal intimidation, all designed to silence her before she could formally report her findings. He gestured to Danica. Ms. Thornton demonstrated professional integrity and personal courage that should be the standard in corporate environments. Instead, it was treated as a liability. I take personal responsibility for not protecting her adequately during this process. I should have moved faster. I should have been more forceful in my response to the intimidation tactics. The journalists were on their feet now, shouting questions, their cameras focused on both Seo-jun and Danica. The board of directors will appoint an external audit firm to investigate the full scope of the fraud. All evidence has been provided to the prosecutors. Key personnel have been suspended pending legal proceedings. And the Intelligent Infrastructure Project is being suspended until the technical integrity issues can be fully resolved. However, I want to make clear that while the project is suspended, the intention is not cancellation. It is correction. We will rebuild this project on a foundation of ethical governance and technical excellence. He looked directly at Danica when he said, technical excellence. It was a clear statement. She was not at fault. The system was not flawed. The people who deliberately sabotaged the system were at fault. The press conference lasted 40 minutes. Seo-jun fielded questions about the scope of the fraud, the identity of the people involved, the projected cost of the investigations, and the future of the company. He was careful not to name Kwon directly. That would be handled through legal processes. But the implications were clear. And every response reinforced that he was positioning himself as the reformer, the CEO who'd chosen integrity over complicity. When it was over, security immediately moved to escort Danica and Seo-jun away from the journalists. But in that moment, between the ending of the press conference and the actual exit, something happened that the cameras caught perfectly. Seo-jun turned to Danica and briefly placed his hand on her back, a gesture that was simultaneously protective and proprietary, that could be read as either respect or possession, depending on the viewer's bias. The media would make 1,000 interpretations of that gesture, but the interpretation that would dominate was the one that had been planted in the earlier article, that their relationship was personal, not professional, that her promotion was based on proximity to the CEO, not on merit. It was exactly what Danica had feared. The media narrative shifted almost immediately. Instead of CEO exposes major corporate fraud, the story became CEO's relationship with American contractor raises questions about judgment. Instead of focusing on the technical integrity issues that Danica had discovered, the news covered the dramatic romantic undertones of the press conference. Instead of celebrating her courage, they questioned whether her courage was even necessary, whether she was just a pawn in some corporate power struggle between Seo-jun and Kwon. Within hours, old photos of her had been dug up. Graduation pictures, conference photos from her previous job, any image that could be used to create a narrative of ambitious foreign woman climbs corporate ladder through personal relationships. Her parents in Chicago sent increasingly worried text messages. Her former colleagues reached out expressing concern that she was making poor professional choices. The world had decided her story for her. What was worse, some of that narrative was not entirely unfair. There was a personal element to what had happened. Seo-jun had hired her specifically because he'd suspected corruption and wanted an outside auditor. He had protected her in ways that had nothing to do with professional duty and everything to do with personal respect. And when the moment came to make a choice between multiple strategies, he'd chosen the strategy that maximized her visibility and put her at the center of the narrative, which was the strategy most likely to result in her public embarrassment. She discovered this when she received a phone call from a senior executive at a major American tech company, someone who'd seen the press conference and wanted to hire her for a critical infrastructure position at significantly increased salary. It was a dream offer, and it was also, unmistakably, a rescue offer. She was being offered a way out, a way to escape Seoul before the scandal destroyed her. She called Seo-jun. "Someone's offering me a job, a real position, leadership role, significantly better salary, based in San Francisco. I think they're offering me an exit. Are you going to take it?" His voice was carefully neutral. "I don't know. Are you telling me I should?" "No," he replied. "But I'm telling you that if you take it, I will understand completely, and I will not try to convince you otherwise. You came here to prove your competence on a global scale. You've done that. You don't owe this company anything beyond what you've already provided." "That's not an answer to my question." "No," he agreed. "My answer is that I need you to stay because I believe what we started here is not finished. I need you to stay because the project matters and you're the only person who can rebuild it ethically. And I need you to stay because I'm going to lose everything in the next few months. My position, probably my job, certainly my reputation. And the only thing that will make that bearable is knowing that someone chose the principle alongside me rather than choosing safety." It was the most selfish and most honest thing she'd heard from him. It was also the moment where she realized that love, or whatever this was, had already happened. It had happened sometime between the late-night conversation in his office and the moment he'd placed his hand on her back at the press conference. It had happened because they'd chosen the truth together, when choosing the truth was difficult. "I'll stay," she said. "Danica." "I'll stay," she repeated. "But not because you need me, not because of the project, but because I need to know that there's someone else in this world who believes that integrity is worth the cost, And I need to be that person alongside you." There was silence on the line. Then, "We're going to lose the battle for narrative. The story is already written. By the time the evidence is fully investigated and the fraud is proven, the media will have moved on to something else, and what will remain is the impression that you slept your way into credibility and that I abused my power to protect a personal relationship." "I know," Danica replied, "but we'll have the truth, and we'll have each other's testimony to that truth, and maybe that's enough." The conversation ended, and Danica made the decision to stay in Seoul, to remain on the Aurora Dynamics contract, to rebuild the intelligent infrastructure project on the foundation of integrity. It was the decision that made sense professionally. It was also the decision that guaranteed that her personal life would be scrutinized, questioned, reframed through narratives she could not control. But she'd made peace with that, because she understood now that credibility, true credibility, wasn't about controlling the narrative. It was about knowing your own truth so completely that other people's interpretations couldn't dislodge it. The weeks that followed were a strange combination of professional vindication and personal devastation. The evidence that Danica had compiled was so clear, so undeniable, that the prosecutor's case against Kwon and his network was essentially uncontestable. What unfolded was not so much a trial as a systematic revelation of how corporate corruption actually functioned at the highest levels, not through dramatic moments, but through 1,000 small compromises, 1,000 moments where people chose silence or complicity because the cost of choosing righteousness seemed too high. Kwon Tae-oh was charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The offshore accounts that Min-ji had helped trace were seized. The network of executives and board members who'd been involved in the scheme began, one by one, to resign or be asked to resign. The company underwent the trauma of transformation, investigations, restructuring, a complete purge of the systems and processes that had allowed the fraud to flourish. But every news cycle that covered the fraud also covered the romantic subplot. Every article about Kwon's downfall mentioned Danica as the American engineer whose relationship with the CEO brought the fraud to light. Every story that should have been about her professional excellence was instead about her personal proximity to power. It was in many ways exactly what Seo-jun had predicted. The professional toll was less severe than it could have been, because the technical evidence was so comprehensive and her audit of the intelligent infrastructure project had genuinely prevented a disaster. But the personal toll was significant. She received messages suggesting she'd slept her way into prominence. She received marriage proposals from men who saw her as an opportunity to access the company. She received emails from Korean women in tech expressing resentment that a foreigner had stolen a leadership role. And she received very few emails from people simply congratulating her on her technical competence. One evening, about 8 weeks after the press conference, she was working late in her new office, officially promoted to senior systems engineer, a position that came with better resources and worse scrutiny, when Min-ji appeared in her doorway. "I wanted you to see something," Min-ji said. She was holding a tablet. On the screen was an academic paper, Systematic Sabotage in Intelligent Infrastructure, a case study in ethical corruption, published by a Seoul-based engineering journal, written by 5 authors including Danica and Ji-hoon. The paper presented the technical findings without any reference to the personal drama. It focused purely on the engineering flaws, the method of their introduction, and the safeguards that could prevent similar sabotage in future projects. It was, in other words, a scholarly work that documented her competence in a way that could not be dismissed as romantic involvement. Ji-hoon submitted this about 3 weeks ago, Min-ji explained. The journal accepted it remarkably quickly. They recognized it as foundational work in infrastructure security. It will be cited in the field for years. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Danica asked. "Because we wanted to surprise you when it was published," Min-ji said. "And because sometimes the best response to people who are trying to reduce you to a narrative is to produce work so competent that the narrative becomes irrelevant." Danica read through the paper, seeing her technical analysis presented in academic language, seeing her competence documented in a way that transcended corporate politics and personal drama. seeing her name alongside the names of Korean engineers who'd worked with her and trusted her. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for understanding what I needed." "I understand," Minji replied, "because I've spent my whole career being reduced to a narrative. Secretary, assistant, support staff. For years, I believed that was the limit of who I could be. But watching you fight for your credibility, watching you refuse to accept the story people were telling about you, it gave me permission to fight for my own credibility too." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Mr. Ri is promoting me to Director of Corporate Operations. A real position, real authority, real opportunity to implement the governance structures that we talked about implementing to prevent this kind of corruption in the future. I'm leaving the secretary role officially, though I'll maintain advisory relationship with Mr. Ri." Danica stood up and embraced Minji, which violated multiple corporate protocols but felt like the only appropriate response. "Congratulations," she said. "You deserve that." "We both deserved a lot of things," Minji replied. "The difference is, we fought for them." Kwon Tae-oh was out on bail pending trial, and he made one final move designed to communicate that he was not defeated, that he still wielded power, that the battle between him and Seo-jun was not over. He sent a message to Danica through an intermediary, a lawyer who appeared at her apartment building one evening as she was leaving for work. The message was simple. She should meet with him to discuss her role in precipitating his downfall, with the implication that there were two ways the meeting could go. Either she could listen to him, or she could experience serious professional and personal consequences. She didn't report the message to Seo-jun. Instead, she reported it to the prosecutors, who instructed her to take it seriously, but not to panic. She also contacted a security firm and hired a personal protection specialist. She was not going to be intimidated into silence again. But Kwon pushed anyway. He requested a private meeting with her through official channels, a deposition related to her testimony in the fraud case. The meeting took place in a law office downtown, in a conference room that felt more like the setting of a dramatic confrontation than a legal proceeding. Kwon arrived impeccably dressed, his demeanor suggesting that the fraud charges were a minor inconvenience rather than existential threat. "Ms. Thornton," he began, his English precise and cultured. "I wanted the opportunity to speak with you directly, rather than through layers of legal representation." "I'm here," Danica replied. The lawyer the prosecution had assigned to her sat beside her, present but silent. "You've created quite a situation," Kwon continued. "You've cost me my position, my reputation, my freedom temporarily. You've also cost me a considerable amount of money, as the offshore accounts have been seized pending legal resolution. I discovered facts," Danica said carefully. "I reported those facts. I didn't create the situation. I made it visible." "Precisely," Kwon said. "And that distinction is the only thing that keeps me from pursuing more aggressive options." He smiled, not warmly, but with genuine appreciation for the complexity of the situation. "You see, I could have you destroyed. I have resources, connections, allies who owe me favors. I could ensure that you never work in Asia again, that your reputation was permanently damaged, that your safety in this city was compromised. I could do all of that, and I would probably escape serious legal consequences. And yet you're not doing that," Danica observed. "No, because doing so would confirm everything that Seo-jun is trying to prove about me. It would make me precisely the villain that the prosecutors are painting me as. It would guarantee my conviction rather than simply suggesting my probable guilt. So instead, I'm going to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" "I want you to tell the prosecutors that you discovered the Cascade vulnerability, but you're not entirely certain about who introduced it. I want you to suggest that there might have been people involved in the decision-making process who were unaware of the implications of the parameters they were approving." "No," Danica replied. "I haven't finished. I don't need you to finish. The answer is no. I discovered what I discovered. The documentation is what it is. I'm not going to lie for you in exchange for safety." Kwon regarded her with something that might have been respect. "You understand that your refusal will likely result in my conviction and imprisonment?" "Yes." "And you're comfortable with that outcome?" "I'm comfortable with the truth," Danica replied. "What happens to you as a result of the truth is not my responsibility." Kwon nodded slowly. He gestured to his lawyer, who placed a folder on the table. "In that case, I'm going to play my last card. This contains information about Seo-jun that you should be aware of, information that contradicts the reformer narrative he's been cultivating." The lawyer opened the folder. It contained documents, emails, financial records, meeting notes, all suggesting that Seo-jun had known about the Cascade vulnerability for longer than he'd publicly claimed, that he might have even delayed revealing it in order to gather more evidence, that his motivations for the exposure might have been less about protecting the public and more about eliminating a rival from the board. It was a smaller truth hidden inside the larger truth, and if released strategically, it could undermine his narrative significantly. "These are yours to keep," Kwon said. "Share them with the prosecutors, share them with the media, or keep them to yourself. The choice is yours. But I thought you should have complete information when you're deciding what level of loyalty you're willing to maintain toward a man who might not be as innocent as you believe." Danica looked at the documents. Then she looked at Kwon. "My loyalty to Seo-jun is not based on his perfection," she said. "It's based on his choice to act. Yes, he might have known about the problems earlier than he publicly admitted. Yes, his motivations might have been mixed. That doesn't change the fact that when given a choice between hiding the corruption and exposing it, he chose exposure. That's still integrity. It's just integrity with complications." She picked up the folder and stood. "Thank you for the information. I'm sure the prosecutors will be interested in reviewing it." As she left the meeting, she felt Kwon's eyes on her back. The threat was not quite over, but it was transforming into something that might, eventually, become irrelevant. The documents that Kwon had provided forced Danica to have a difficult conversation with Seo-jun about the timeline of his knowledge and his motivations. She could have not told him. She could have let the prosecutors discover the information independently. But integrity, it turned out, was not a solitary virtue. It required being willing to challenge people you cared about, to ask hard questions, to refuse easy versions of truth. She found him in his office late at night, as she often did now. The city spread below them in its nocturnal transformation. Glass and light, and the endless electric pulse of Seoul. "Kwon gave me documents," she said. No preamble, no softening. Just the truth. As Seo-jun looked up from his laptop, his expression didn't change, but his hands tightened on the keyboard. "Documents suggesting that you knew about the Cascade vulnerability earlier than you publicly admitted, that you might have delayed exposure in order to gather more comprehensive evidence against Kwon and his network, that your motivations for the public revelation might have been mixed. Part reformer, part competitor." "That's accurate," Seo-jun said quietly. "So the narrative you've been cultivating, the reformer CEO who discovered corruption and acted immediately to protect the company, is a simplified version of the truth." "Yes. Why didn't you tell me this?" Seo-jun was quiet for a long time. "Because I needed you to believe that your discovery was what prompted my action. I needed you to have confidence in the idea that you were the catalyst for change. If I'd told you that I'd suspected the problems for months, that I'd deliberately delayed exposure to gather more comprehensive evidence, then your role would have been less clear. You would have become part of my strategy rather than the person who forced me to act." "I am part of your strategy," Danica replied. "I was always part of your strategy. From the moment you hired me, I was part of your plan to eliminate Kwon. The question is whether I was part of your plan in a way that violated my autonomy or in a way that respected it." "I don't know the answer to that question," Seo-jun admitted. "I hired you because I needed an auditor who would be outside the existing power structures. I hired you because I suspected corruption, and I wanted documentation of it. But I also hired you because I recognized in you the same resistance to compromise that I was trying to remember about myself. I wanted you to remind me that integrity was possible. Whether that was strategic or sincere, I genuinely don't know. Danica walked to the window. Seoul spread below them like a circuit board, all connections and electricity and light. I'm going to give the documents to the prosecutors, she said, which means your timeline is going to be questioned. Your motivations are going to be scrutinized. The narrative of the reformer CEO is going to become more complicated. I know, Seo-jun replied, and I deserve that complication. Do you? Yes. Because I did what needed to be done, but I did it partially for the right reasons, and partially for reasons that were about power and leverage. I eliminated a rival while also pursuing justice. The two things happened simultaneously, and I can't fully separate them. I can't tell you that I acted purely from principle, because that would be a lie. Danica turned back to face him. At least you're acknowledging the complication rather than hiding behind the narrative. I learned that from you, Seo-jun said. From watching you refuse to accept the story people were trying to tell about you. From watching you insist on the more complicated truth, even when it was easier to accept the simpler version. I learned from you that integrity requires being willing to hold multiple truths simultaneously. Then maybe, Danica said quietly, we're both learning what it actually means to be ethical, not clean, not simple, not reducible to a single narrative, but real. She walked back to his desk and sat down across from him. They sat in silence for a long time. Two people who'd entered into alliance for complicated reasons and had discovered that the alliance had become something that transcended its original intentions. I need to ask you something, Seo-jun said finally, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay. Are you staying in Seoul because you believe in the work we're doing, or because you're afraid of what people will say if you leave? Danica considered the question seriously. Both, she said. I'm staying because I believe the work matters. I'm also staying because running away would confirm every narrative about me being weak, being intimidated, being unable to handle the challenges of operating in a space that's resistant to change. So yes, both reasons are operating simultaneously. That's honest, Seo-jun said. That's what I needed to hear. Why? Because it means you're staying for the right reasons, even though some of the reasons are about self-preservation. It means you understand that purity is a luxury that's not available to people actually trying to change things. You can act with integrity and still have mixed motivations. Those things are not mutually exclusive. Danica called her parents for the first time in weeks. It was late in Seoul, which meant it was early morning in Chicago. Her mother answered on the second ring, the kind of alertness that came from years of worrying about her daughter on another continent. Hey, Mama. Baby, are you okay? We've been seeing things in the news and I couldn't... I know. I'm sorry I haven't called. I needed to understand what was happening before I could talk about it. Danica spent the next hour telling her parents everything. She told them about arriving in Seoul, about discovering the corruption, about Seo-jun, about the complicated alliance, about the media narrative that had tried to reduce her accomplishment to romantic involvement. She told them about the academic paper that had been published, about the promotion she'd received, about the decision to stay in Korea and rebuild the infrastructure project. Her father, an electrician who'd spent his whole career understanding how systems worked and how critical infrastructure kept communities alive, was quiet for a long time after she finished. I'm proud of you, he said finally, for doing the hard thing, for not backing down when people tried to make you disappear. I'm scared, Danica admitted. I'm scared that I made the wrong decision. I'm scared that staying here means accepting a complicated relationship with someone who used me strategically. I'm scared that my credibility is permanently damaged because people are never going to separate my professional competence from the fact that I'm involved with the CEO. That last part is true, her mother said. People will probably always think there's a romantic element to your professional advancement. But here's what I know about you, Danica. You have never, in your entire life, accepted a version of yourself that was less than who you actually are. You fought in every classroom, every workplace, every room you entered to be seen as competent and capable and intelligent. And you did that long before you met this CEO. So whatever they say about your motivations, you know the truth. And that truth is enough. Is it? Danica asked. Is the truth enough if the world doesn't believe you? The world doesn't have to believe you, her mother replied. You have to believe you. And then you have to move forward as if you're right. And eventually enough other people will recognize the truth that it becomes harder to deny. After the call ended, Danica sat in her apartment and looked out at Seoul's morning landscape. The rain that had been such a constant presence over the past weeks had finally stopped. The city looked cleaner, clearer, like something had been washed away, and what remained was true and solid. She thought about the choice she'd made to stay, about the decision to build something in a space that was resistant to her, about the willingness to be misunderstood and criticized in service of something that mattered. Her mother was right. The truth was enough. Not because the world would eventually recognize it, but because living in alignment with the truth was the only way to maintain your integrity. Everything else was just noise. The process of rebuilding the intelligent infrastructure project took 4 months. 4 months of redesigning systems, rewriting code, eliminating the sabotage mechanisms, implementing new governance structures, and creating redundancy protocols that would prevent future corruption. Danica led the technical reconstruction. Ji-hoon managed the engineering team. Minji implemented the new governance structures. And Seo-jun provided the executive protection that allowed them to work without constant interference from the remaining elements of Kwan's network who wanted to slow or stop the progress. On the day that the reconstructed system passed its first complete integrity test, Danica received a message from Seo-jun. Come to the office, tonight. We need to talk. She assumed it was going to be another late-night conversation about corporate strategy or project challenges. Instead, she found him on the rooftop of Aurora Dynamics, a space that wasn't typically accessible to employees, that existed in a kind of liminal space between the corporate world and the wider city. I brought you here because I wanted to tell you something away from the building, away from the places where we're always performing roles, Seo-jun said. He handed her a small box. Before you open that, I want to say something out loud. Danica's heart was moving faster than she expected. She had resisted allowing herself to think about what this moment might mean, had kept her emotional distance from Seo-jun in professional settings, had not permitted herself to acknowledge that the alliance had transformed into something that no business relationship could contain. I know the circumstances of how we met are complicated, Seo-jun continued. I know that I hired you partially for strategic reasons. I know that I used you, and I know that you used me. I know that the media will probably forever interpret this as a power imbalance that worked out conveniently for both of us. But I also know that somewhere in the middle of all that complexity, something happened that was real. Something that had nothing to do with strategy or positioning or power. He opened the box. It contained not a ring. They had not discussed marriage, and Danica had made clear that she was not interested in formalizing anything that quickly, but 2 identical watches. Chronographs, expensive, practical, the kind of thing that engineers would appreciate because they served a function rather than simply existing as decoration. You remember that you let me wear your watch that time? Seo-jun asked. When you had to go to that emergency board meeting and your watch was being repaired, Danica replied. I wore it the entire time. I felt like I was carrying something of you with me, like I had permission to be more human than I usually was, because I was literally holding on to something that mattered to you. He held up one of the new watches. I want us to both carry something like that. Not as a romantic gesture exactly, as a reminder that we chose each other when choosing each other was difficult. As a reminder that we both believed the truth was worth the cost. Danica opened the other watch. Inside the case, engraved on the back, were coordinates. The coordinates of the rooftop where they were standing. What is this? She asked. A place to meet, Seo-jun replied. Whenever we need to remember why we chose this. Whenever the corporate world tries to reduce us to a transaction or a scandal or a convenient narrative, We can come here and we can remember that the truth was more important than safety. Danica put on the watch. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her, which it had been. She looked at Seo-jun and allowed herself to acknowledge what she'd been resisting, that she had fallen in love with him, not because of his power or his position, but because of his willingness to abandon both in service of integrity. "I have something to tell you," she said. "The academic paper? It's going to be published in international journals. I've already gotten 3 speaking invitations based on preliminary circulation of the findings. In 2 years, I could probably move into any infrastructure position I want. I could leave Aurora, and no one would question it." "But you're not going to leave," Seo-jun said. It was not a question. "Not yet," Danica replied. "Because the reconstruction isn't finished. Because Minji's governance reforms need another year to solidify. Because the Intelligent Infrastructure Project deserves to go live with someone who genuinely cares about its success. And because..." She paused, allowing herself to speak the truth that the watch had somehow given her permission to voice. "Because I want to build something with you. Not as a CEO and contractor. As 2 people who've decided that integrity matters more than convenience." "Is that a yes?" Seo-jun asked. "That's a beginning," Danica replied. "To whatever this becomes, on the condition that we're both always honest about the complexity. On the condition that we don't let the world's narrative about us replace our own truth. On the condition that we choose the difficult thing over the convenient thing, again and again." "I can do that," Seo-jun said. They stood on the rooftop of Aurora Dynamics as the city spread below them, Seoul glittering in the darkness. The neon and electricity an endless pulse of a place where 2 people from completely different worlds had chosen to build something real. 6 months after the reconstruction began, the Intelligent Infrastructure Project was ready for launch. The system had been rebuilt from the ground up, every component audited, every parameter verified, every fail-safe tested and retested. It was not just a repaired project. It was a demonstration that infrastructure could be built ethically, that corporations could choose principle over profit, that systems could be designed to protect the public rather than the powerful. The launch was held in a different venue than the scandal press conference had been. This time, it was held in Seoul's District 18, in a public space where the actual people who would benefit from the intelligent infrastructure system could attend. It was designed to be about the project and the people it served, not about corporate drama. Danica stood beside Seo-jun at the podium. This time, the positioning was intentional rather than accidental. This time, there was no ambiguity about whether she was central to the project or peripheral to it. She had designed the system. She had audited it. She had rebuilt it. She was its architect and its protector. "Thank you for being here," Seo-jun began. 6 months ago, we discovered that our intelligent infrastructure project had been deliberately sabotaged. Today, I'm proud to announce that the project is not only recovered but improved. It represents everything that ethical infrastructure development should look like. He handed the microphone to Danica. "What we've built here in Seoul," she said, and she could hear her own accent coming through, could see the international audience recognizing that they were listening to an American woman speaking about Korean infrastructure, could feel the weight of all the assumptions about her credibility and her motivations. But she continued anyway. "Is a system that was designed not to maximize profit, but to maximize safety. Every decision we made in the reconstruction was guided by one principle: what serves the people this system is designed to protect. I came to Korea as a contractor. I'm leaving it as someone who helped build something that will protect communities for decades." She paused. "I also want to say something personal. I came to Korea in part running away from a situation where my competence was questioned and my voice was silenced. In the process of doing the work here, I discovered that the solution wasn't to find a place where I wouldn't face that resistance. The solution was to refuse to be silenced despite the resistance. And the solution was to find people who would stand with me when standing with me was costly." She looked at Seo-jun when she said that. The media, of course, interpreted it as romance. But it was something bigger than that. It was the recognition that integrity was not a solitary virtue. It required allies. It required people willing to risk something for truth. The system went live that afternoon. The first phase was just monitoring. The system would gather data, would prove its reliability, would demonstrate that the infrastructure it was designed to manage was stable and safe. The full implementation would happen over the following 6 months, until eventually every kilowatt of power flowing through Seoul's District 18 would flow through the intelligent infrastructure system that Danica had designed and rebuilt. That night, the team celebrated in a restaurant that Minji had chosen specifically, a place that served traditional Korean food but had enough international staff that Danica wouldn't feel entirely out of place. Ji-hoon proposed a toast. "To the system," he said, "and to the people who were willing to build it the right way." They all raised their glasses. Seo-jun and Danica, Minji and Ji-hoon, the engineers and programmers and project managers who had spent 6 months in dedicated work. People from different countries, different backgrounds, different experiences, united in the belief that the work mattered and that integrity was worth the cost. "And one more thing," Ji-hoon continued. 3 companies have already reached out asking us to help develop similar projects in other cities. They specifically requested Danica because they'd read the academic paper and they understood that she brings both technical excellence and ethical commitment. So this isn't the end of the story. This is the beginning of something larger. Danica felt Seo-jun's hand find hers under the table. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was just a quiet acknowledgement of what they'd built together and what they would continue to build. Kwon Taeho's trial concluded 6 months later with a guilty verdict on all charges. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. But that outcome was almost anticlimactic. The real story was not Kwon's downfall, but the transformation that had happened around his downfall. Aurora Dynamics emerged from the scandal not destroyed but restructured. The company implemented new governance protocols, created independent audit functions, established ethical oversight committees. It became, somewhat ironically, more attractive to international investors because it had demonstrated that it was willing to root out corruption and rebuild itself in the process. Seo-jun's position was secure, not because he'd managed to avoid criticism, but because he'd been transparent about the complexity of his role in the discovery and exposure. He'd acknowledged that his motivations were mixed, that he'd made strategic decisions in addition to ethical ones, and that both things could be true simultaneously. The shareholders appreciated the honesty, because it suggested he was the kind of leader who could navigate complex situations without losing his integrity. Minji was promoted to a permanent director role. She built a department dedicated to corporate governance and ethical implementation. She became the first woman to occupy a position at that level in Aurora Dynamics, which was significant not because her gender mattered, but because it meant that the company was finally willing to promote people based on competence, rather than maintaining established power structures. Ji-hoon received offers from multiple companies wanting him to lead their technical teams. He stayed at Aurora, but as a senior technical director with actual authority, with the ability to make decisions about infrastructure implementation. The quiet man who had been intimidated into silence became an advocate for technical excellence and ethical implementation. And Danica received offers from everywhere: international tech companies, academic institutions, government agencies. Everyone wanted the woman who'd discovered corporate corruption and who'd proven that infrastructure could be built ethically. She negotiated a contract with Aurora that allowed her to split her time between Seoul and visiting engineer positions at other companies, essentially turning herself into an ambassador for ethical infrastructure development across Asia. 12 months after the intelligent infrastructure system went live, it had prevented 47 potential cascade failures, situations where the old system would have collapsed, but the new system had automatically adjusted parameters to maintain stability. 12 potential deaths prevented, hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure damage prevented, thousands of households and businesses protected by the system's proactive safety mechanisms. The numbers were concrete proof that integrity wasn't just an abstract principle. It saved lives. On the day that Danica's 1-year contract with Aurora Dynamics was set to expire, Seo-jun wrote her a letter. He didn't intend to send it. He wrote it the way people sometimes write letters to explain things to themselves, to organize thoughts, to make sense of complicated situations. Danica, 1 year ago, I hired you for strategic reasons. I wanted an external auditor who would discover the corruption I suspected was happening. I wanted the documentation I needed to move against Kwon. I wanted, if I'm being completely honest, a ladder that I could climb and then discard once I'd reached the height I needed to reach. Instead, you became the person who forced me to choose between the mask I was wearing and the person I actually wanted to be. You refused to accept the simplified narrative I was offering. You refused to be manipulated into silence. You refused to allow yourself to be made small in a space that wanted you to disappear. In doing all of that, you gave me permission to do the same. You showed me that I didn't have to be the cold CEO, the strategic game player, the man who had learned to value power above principle. You showed me that there was another way to lead, a way that was still strong, still demanding, but also human. I know the world will never understand what we built here. They'll see the romantic subplot and miss the professional partnership. They'll see the power imbalance and miss the mutual respect. They'll reduce our story to a narrative that satisfies their need for easy explanations, even though the truth is more complex and more interesting than that. But I want you to know that I see the truth. I see your competence. I see your courage. I see the way you've changed this company, and changed this city, and changed me. And I want to spend whatever time you're willing to give me, building something real with that truth as the foundation. The question isn't whether you should renew your contract with Aurora. The question is whether we're going to continue choosing each other, one decision at a time, even though it would be easier to choose safety. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing the difficult thing. What are you choosing? Seo Jun. He wrote the letter but never sent it. Instead, on the day her contract was set to expire, he asked her to come to his office. She found him standing at the window, looking out at Seoul's afternoon landscape. Your contract expires today, he said, without preamble. I know, Danica replied. Do you want to renew it? She walked to the window and stood beside him. Seoul spread below them, the same city she'd arrived in a year ago, scared and defensive, and convinced that the only way to survive was to maintain perfect professional distance. Now she understood that survival required the opposite. It required connection, vulnerability, the willingness to be changed by the people and places you encountered. Not as a contractor, she said. I want to renew it as something else. I want to be the director of infrastructure systems for Aurora Dynamics. I want a permanent position, with authority and responsibility, not as protection for a personal relationship, but as genuine professional opportunity. That would mean being associated with me openly, Seo Jun said. That would mean the world would probably always interpret your position as something you've gained through romantic proximity rather than through merit. I know, Danica replied. But I've decided that I don't care anymore what the world interprets. I care about the truth of what I've accomplished and what I can continue to accomplish. And the truth is, I'm excellent at this work. The truth is, I've proven my competence repeatedly. The truth is, my relationship with you doesn't diminish that. It just complicates the narrative around it. So you're saying yes? I'm saying yes, with conditions. What conditions? That we're both transparent about the complexity. That we don't pretend our relationship isn't personal. That we also don't pretend it's the reason I'm effective at my job. That we're willing to be misunderstood and criticized and still maintain our integrity. And that you promise to challenge me when I'm being less than my best, and I promise to do the same for you. Seo Jun was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned over and kissed her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't filmed by media cameras or witnessed by crowds. It was private, real, the kind of kiss that acknowledged both the romance and the partnership, both the personal and the professional. I can promise that, he said when he pulled away. The news that Danica Thornton had been appointed Director of Infrastructure Systems for Aurora Dynamics broke simultaneously with the news that she was in a relationship with CEO Seo Jun Ri. The media, of course, ran with the relationship story first, the structural promotion second. But this time, there was something different in how the narrative unfolded. Because the academic paper had been published. Because the intelligent infrastructure system was demonstrably successful. Because there was clear documentation of Danika's technical competence and her professional contribution. The narrative couldn't successfully be reduced to romance because the evidence of her excellence was too comprehensive, too well documented, too difficult to dismiss. There were still people who would question whether she deserved her position. There would always be people who reduced her achievement to her personal relationship. But now there was also evidence, substantial and ongoing, that her competence was extraordinary, and that her position was deserved regardless of her personal circumstances. On the day she officially assumed her new role, Seoul received its first heavy rain in months. The kind of rain that seemed to wash the city clean, that transformed the streets into mirrors, that made everything look new and alive and possible. Danica stood in her new office, larger than her previous office, with a better view, with the kind of resources that acknowledged her authority, and she looked out at the rain-transformed city. She thought about the Black American engineer who'd arrived a year ago, scared and defensive, and convinced that she had to fight every battle alone. She thought about the CEO she'd met in a boardroom at midnight, carrying his own weight, his own doubts, his own war. She thought about the choice they'd both made, to stand together when standing together was difficult. Minji appeared in her office doorway. "The executive team is waiting for you in the conference room. They want to hear about your strategic vision for the next 3 years." Danica gathered her materials. She was no longer an auditor discovering problems. She was a leader who had to build solutions. She was no longer fighting for credibility. She was fighting to create something that would last beyond the scandal, beyond the public scrutiny, beyond the complications of her personal relationship with the CEO. "Let's go," she said to Minji. As they walked to the conference room, Minji caught her hand briefly. "I just want to say something. I'm proud of how you handled this. The promotion, the public acknowledgement of your relationship with Mr. Ri, the decision to stay and build something instead of running away. I'm proud of you." "I learned it from you," Danica replied. "From watching you move from being invisible to being visible, from being silent to speaking your truth, from watching you demand to be seen." In the conference room, Seo-jun was waiting. He was in his CEO mode, formal, demanding, strategic. But when his eyes met Danika's across the table, there was a flash of recognition, acknowledgement of what they'd built together, reminder of the decision they'd made to choose the difficult thing. "Let's begin," he said, and the executive meeting started. Danica presented her vision for the next 3 years of infrastructure development. She talked about the intelligent infrastructure system scaling across Korea. She talked about training programs to develop other infrastructure engineers. She talked about expanding to other Asian cities, other countries, other regions. She talked about building a legacy that would extend beyond this company, beyond this moment, beyond the personal drama that had surrounded the project's genesis. She talked about infrastructure that would keep people safe, about systems that would serve communities, about the responsibility of people in positions of power to use that power in service of something larger than themselves. She presented evidence, data, projections, all delivered with the confidence of someone who knew her competence and was no longer afraid to demonstrate it. When she finished, the executives nodded. They asked questions. They challenged her assumptions. They tested her knowledge. And she answered with the authority of someone who had earned the right to be in that room, not through romantic proximity, but through competence. Afterward, she and Seo-jun walked back to his office. The rain continued outside, persistent, cleansing. Seoul remained transformed by the water, everything washed clean, ready for whatever came next. "You were brilliant in there," Seo-jun said. "You were formal," Danica replied. "You didn't smile at any of my jokes." "I know. In the professional context, I need to establish that your position is based on your competence, not on any special treatment you receive from me. I need to be harder on you than I am on other executives, more demanding, more critical. That's the only way to prove that your promotion isn't about favoritism. I understand, Danica said. And I appreciate it. It's what I needed. They reached his office. The door closed behind them, and suddenly they were no longer in CEO and director mode. They were just two people who'd chosen each other, who'd survived the complications, who'd built something real and difficult and true. I have something for you, Seo-jun said. He pulled out a small box. Inside was a folder, the kind of folder you use to protect important documents. Inside the folder was a plane ticket and a hotel reservation in Chicago. What is this? Danica asked. This is for next month. I'm taking a week away from Aurora. I'm flying to Chicago with you to meet your parents formally. I'm going to introduce myself as your partner, not as your CEO. I'm going to spend time in the city that made you who you are. And then I'm bringing you back to Seoul, and we're going to continue building this together. Danica felt something release inside her, a tension she'd been carrying since she'd arrived in Seoul, the part of her that had been waiting for this to fall apart, waiting for the complicated thing to prove too difficult to maintain. Okay, she said. That sounds right. And one more thing, Seo-jun continued. I've been thinking about that watch you're wearing, the one with the coordinates of the rooftop. I want to give you something else, another watch with different coordinates. What coordinates? The coordinates of the coffee shop where we had our first real conversation about integrity. Where Minji helped us realize that we were going to have to choose between silence and speaking. I want us to always remember that moment. I want us to always remember the moment we decided that truth was worth the cost. Danica put on the second watch. It felt heavier than the first one, or perhaps it just felt more significant because it represented something important. A moment where she'd realized that it was possible to build real, difficult things with real, complicated people. When do we leave for Chicago? She asked. The 16th, Seo-jun replied. Next month. My flight leaves the night before yours, so I'll meet you at your apartment. We'll go to the airport together. That's good, Danica said. My mom will want to see us arrive together. She'll want to know that you're real, that this is real, that I didn't imagine the whole thing. Did you ever doubt whether it was real? Seo-jun asked. Danica thought about the question. She thought about the arrival in Seoul, the fear of being exposed as a fraud, the terror of being reduced to a narrative she couldn't control. She thought about the discovery of corruption, the decision to speak truth, the willingness to lose everything for principle. She thought about choosing each other when choosing each other was difficult. No, she said finally. No, I never doubted it was real. But I needed to understand that real doesn't mean simple. Real means complicated, messy, difficult, but true. The rain outside continued. Seoul remained transformed. And Danica understood, fully and finally, that she had come to Korea not to escape her past, but to build her future. She had come seeking redemption and had discovered something larger, the understanding that integrity was possible, that it was worth the cost, and that it was most powerful when built alongside someone else who believed the same thing. She had come to Seoul for a 1-year contract with a powerful CEO. The impossible had happened. She had found home. Epilogue. The letter he would send. 2 years later, in the office that had become permanent home rather than temporary assignment, Danica opened an envelope that had been placed on her desk by Seo-jun's administrative assistant. It contained a letter. Not the letter he'd never sent, but a new letter, dated that morning. Danica, 2 years ago, you walked off an airplane in Seoul with no idea that you were walking into the transformation of your professional life and the deepening of your personal life. I walked into a boardroom expecting to meet a contractor I could use strategically. Instead, I met a person who would force me to become more human than I'd ever learned to be. The intelligent infrastructure system you designed is now running in 7 cities across Asia. The governance protocols Minji implemented are being studied in business schools. The academic paper you published is being referenced in infrastructure courses around the world. The message you sent to the world is that integrity is possible, that ethics can coexist with excellence, that the difficult choice is sometimes the only choice that matters. But more important than all of that is what you've built here with me. A partnership. A relationship that doesn't require us to shrink ourselves or compromise our principles. A love that is based on mutual respect and shared values, and the daily choice to remain committed to the truth. I want you to know that I see you. I see your excellence, not just in what you accomplish, but in how you accomplish it, with integrity, with courage, with the willingness to be misunderstood by people who need simple narratives. I see the person who had to fight for credibility her entire life, finally standing in a space where her credibility is undeniable. I see a woman who came to Korea as a contractor and stayed as a builder. I'm asking you to stay longer, not as a contractor with a renewing term, not as a director with annual reviews. I'm asking you to stay as someone who is building a life with me. I'm asking you to marry me. The ring is in the box with this letter. It's not fancy because I know you prefer practical things. It's a simple band with the coordinates of the rooftop engraved inside. Our place. Where we remember why we chose the difficult thing. What do you say? Seo Jun Danica opened the box and found the ring. She put it on her finger, and it fit perfectly, like everything in her life and soul had come to fit perfectly. Not because everything had been easy or simple, but because she had chosen to make it real. She walked to Seo Jun's office and found him waiting. Yes, she said simply. He pulled her into his arms, and they stood for a long moment, two people who had built something remarkable from the complications and difficulties that had brought them together. Outside, Seoul glittered in the afternoon light. The intelligent infrastructure system moved power through the city's veins. Communities were safe because of the system they had built together. And inside the CEO's office on the 47th floor, a Black American engineer and a Korean CEO made plans for their future. A future built on the foundation of choosing the truth, choosing each other, choosing the difficult thing again and again. The impossible had happened. And it was only the beginning. The final truth. The question that opened this story was, what happens when the only person you can trust is the exact person you swore never to trust? The answer, it turns out, is complex. You learn that trust is not weakness. It is the opposite. It is strength transmitted between two people who choose the truth together. You learn that vulnerability with the right person is not a liability, but a gift. You learn that integrity is not a solitary virtue. It requires allies, requires community, requires people willing to risk something for principle. You learn that the person you swore never to trust might be precisely the person you needed to meet to remember what you'd forgotten about yourself. That competence alone is not enough. That standing in your excellence requires building connections with people who see you, that the most powerful transformation happens not in isolation, but in relationship. The intelligent infrastructure system that Danica designed is still running. It has expanded to 17 cities across Asia. It continues to prevent cascade failures, to protect communities, to save lives. The safeguards she built have become industry standard. The ethical protocols Minji implemented have become corporate best practice. But more important than the infrastructure is what it represents. The possibility that people in positions of power can choose principle over comfort, can choose the difficult thing, can build systems that serve communities rather than enrich themselves. And that possibility, that is the real infrastructure. Because systems are only as ethical as the people who build them, and people are only as courageous as the communities that support them, and communities are only as strong as the connections we build with people who choose the truth with us. Danica Thornton went to Seoul to prove her competence on a global scale. She proved it. But more importantly, she discovered something that no international promotion could offer. The understanding that excellence is most powerful when it's built alongside people who share your values. That integrity is most sustainable when it's protected by community. That the impossible only happens when we're willing to risk something for what matters. She went to work with a powerful CEO. The impossible happened. And now, they build together. Every day, in every decision, choosing the difficult thing, choosing the truth, choosing each other. That is the story of the Black American engineer who went to Korea and found not just professional redemption, but personal transformation. That is the story of the CEO who learned that true power comes from choosing people over positions. That is the story of what happens when integrity becomes a shared practice rather than a solitary burden. In Seoul, at night, from the rooftop of Aurora Dynamics, you can see the entire city glittering below you. You can see the intelligent infrastructure system carrying power through the city's veins. You can see the lights of thousands of homes and businesses powered by a system that was built with integrity, maintained by people who chose the truth, protected by a community that decided that what matters is not convenience, but justice. If you look closely, you might see two people on that rooftop, checking their watches. Two watches with the same coordinates, reminders of the moment they chose each other. You might see them looking out at the transformed city, at the evidence of their work, at the proof that the impossible is possible when you're willing to risk everything for something that matters. That is the story of Danica Thornton and Seo Kyungrae. That is the story of infrastructure built on integrity. That is the story of how the impossible happened, and it is ongoing. Every day, the choice continues. Every day, the commitment is renewed. Every day, the two of them walk into meetings and boardrooms and difficult conversations, and they choose the truth. They choose each other. They choose the difficult thing. Because that is what integrity looks like in the real world. Not simple. Not clean. Not reducible to a single narrative. But real. And true. And worth everything it costs.